Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the TeLENZ Legal Tech webinar series. My name is Wayne Rumbles, Associate Professor at Te Paringa Faculty of Law at the University of Waikato. I am the project leader of the Technology and Legal Education for New Zealand project, or TeLENZ, funded by the New Zealand Law Foundation as part of the Information, Law and Policy project. Technological developments do and will continue to raise issues and challenges for government, business and civil society, and have implications for both legal education and legal practice. The law faculties are in a strong position to prepare law graduates for legal practice and IT-driven changes now and into the future. The vision for the project is that all law students in New Zealand are exposed to technology and legal innovation throughout the core law curriculum. To achieve this vision, TeLENZ has teamed up with academics from across the 6 New Zealand law schools to build greater digital capacity and to develop a set of tools and resources that any academic can use to integrate technology and the impact of technology into their core law courses. The project has 3 strands: the creation of teaching resources and the development of New Zealand-specific research in the area of legal tech, and thirdly, the creation of networks and dialogue between academics, practice, and tech providers, both nationally and internationally. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the TeLENZ Legal Tech webinar series.
It's my pleasure to welcome you here to this presentation, this webinar on OpenLaw. OpenLaw is a new and free legal platform. Its purpose is to help increase availability and accessibility to online legal information freely to the public. OpenLaw was founded in 2018 as a non-profit charity in response to the lack of available free legal research tools and data here in New Zealand. The platform is open source and can be modified and used by any non-profit organisation. I was fortunate to be introduced to OpenLaw last year and had a chance to have a play around with the tool. I immediately saw the benefit of OpenLaw to legal practitioners, academics and researchers. And therefore, it is my pleasure to introduce the directors of OpenLaw. Andrew Easterbrook. Andrew is a lawyer and has worked in technology law and civil litigation and family law since 2009. He is experienced in web and software development. Andrew went to university at Vic and now lives in Whangarei. He's also a keyboardist in the band Ferandicus, which was very soon to release their first album. But you can view their music on YouTube and Facebook and even listen to it on Bandcamp. Our second speaker is William Parry. He brings over 15 years tech experience across enterprise, advertising and small business, including 8 years working in open data and projects and hackathons. He has run community coding classes and is passionate about empowering disadvantaged people with technology. William also went to Vic where he studied music and has very detailed GitHub profile, says he lives in Sydney and likes making things. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to William and Andrew.
Thanks very much, Wayne, and it's fantastic to see everybody here. So I'm just going to share my screen and make sure that this presentation comes up for everybody, and then we'll get started. All right. So can everybody see that? I don't actually mean everybody. Can Wayne? Can we?
Yes, we can see that.
Very good. And I'll assume that everybody else can now too. Hello and welcome to this webinar. It's fantastic to be here, and thank you very much to TeLENZ, particularly Wayne and Richmond, for organising it. Wayne, you did our intros better than we could do them. The only thing I was going to add that you didn't is that although I'm a lawyer, my main area of practice is family and civil litigation, but I am a bit of a computer geek, and I'm pretty sure that will become apparent very quickly. William, you've covered William's intro. Did you want to add anything there, William?
No, sounds great. The only thing I would say is that OpenLaw is very fortunate to have so many volunteers as well. So we put out an advertisement on Seek Volunteer a year or so ago, and we've just been inundated with volunteers wanting to help out in any capacity. So that could be developers, designers, lawyers, project managers, and they all just want to get involved in the project. So we've been supported by some tremendous people there, and Seek Volunteer is a fantastic resource. I encourage you to use it if you can. And one of the main things that we like is that we hear some lovely comments from these people about how they just want to give back to New Zealand. So yeah, is us too, and then a whole bunch of really great volunteers with us.
Together, we design, build and deliver OpenLaw NZ services to the public, and we're going to go through what that is. So we'll first cover the problem that we're trying to solve, and explain a little bit about the platform. We'll then touch on some areas of potential collaboration, including how we foresee OpenLaw NZ could be used in the legal curriculum in particular, our roadmap moving forward, and there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. So as Wayne just said, pop those in the chat and we'll get to them. So why did we start OpenLaw? It started because I was lamenting the lack of good legal tools for the public generally. And although I'm a lawyer, I know a bit about technology. So I began tinkering with some PDF extraction tools, because case law comes in PDF format. And so I started playing around a little bit with judicial decisions online. Quickly found myself out of my depth, so I called William, and he's got a bunch of open source projects. So he said, sure. That was about 2.5 years ago, and basically we've spent every night and every weekend on it since. So let's just take a moment to dive into this problem more broadly. The problem is that the New Zealand public suffers from significant barriers that impede access to justice. One part of that broader access to justice issue is access to good legal information, and some of the barriers to getting good legal information include cost, in particular, the cost of lawyers, education, like a law degree is long and reasonably expensive, and information. There's a lot of legal information available to the public, but it's not accessible to everybody. Or if it is, it's really expensive. And Chief Justice Helen Winkleman is on record saying the same sort of thing. So she recognises that in order to protect their rights, citizens must have a means of accessing and understanding substantive law. In other words, part of access to justice involves giving people a way to understand law, not just a way to see it. And this is a particular problem because the proportion of people representing themselves in court is growing. It's currently at about 56% for people in civil cases, and the last few years that's been growing at about 10% per year. In turn, that's a problem because self-represented litigants generally require more time and more resources from judges and court staff than those who are represented by lawyers. And a big part of that is that self-represented litigants don't have access to the right information. Even for those who can afford lawyers, the average cost of doing so is going up and up. Now exceeds on average $300 per hour, and simply that's out of reach to most New Zealanders. Compounding that issue is the disparity in tools and granular information that's available between the public, the general public, and legal professionals. So commercial publishers do provide powerful search. Relational data, like if you're looking at a case, you can see what legislation is mentioned, or you can navigate to related cases. You can get categorizations, case summaries, and a whole lot more. But the commercial publishers are very, very expensive. The general public, on the other hand, only has access to basic text search, so basic keyword search, and you can view the PDF. So our main goal at OpenLaw NZ is to make legal data more accessible and more useful for everybody. While our focus is on the public good, we also endeavour to be a reliable data source for academics and legal professionals. So that's where open law comes in. We've built a platform to address this problem. And the platform is what we're going to talk about today. There are three parts to it. There is the public website, and that's aimed at everybody. That's lay people, lawyers, whoever. It's Willie will take us through that shortly. There's a powerful API. That's mainly for developers to build things. Don't worry if you don't understand what an API is, because William's going to explain that shortly too. And then there's also a new prototype research center. That's something mainly useful for academics and legal researchers. Will.
Cool. Let's start off with the OpenLaw NZ website. It's been beautifully designed by our team of volunteers, and it provides several useful features for the public. It allows users to search and view cases, as well as view rich information such as citations, legislation referenced, and other related cases. And this better equips them to do their own legal research right there on the web page. Now, much of this functionality only exists for the public on openlaw.nz, and it's completely free. Now, how do we get this data that powers that information panel that you can see highlighted where it says cites and cited by? This is our API. Now, hands up, who knows what an API is? Everybody, perfect. All right, moving on. No, an API, or an application programming interface, is a technology concept that allows us to specify how we want to allow software to interact with our systems. So instead of providing raw access to our database for everyone, which is way too permissive, we can allow particular interactions to be used and particular data to be retrieved from our database. Now, if by the end of this presentation, you're still unsure about what an API is, that's okay. There is a Google versus Oracle US Supreme Court battle raging on right now about APIs. So maybe check it out and get your own fill of analogies. For us, the API is the central piece of our ecosystem. We have a lot of case law in our database. We're always wanting more, but we don't want to give direct access to all of it. So instead, we put an API layer in front of it. And that both limits the ways you can retrieve the information, although we do expose most of it. And our website and Chrome extension both make use of the API, similar to the diagram in the slide.
For those who don't know already, so we have a Chrome extension that is a plugin for Google Chrome. What it does is that if you're visiting the official New Zealand legislation website and viewing a section of an act, it inserts a little button above the section, and you can click that, and the API will display to you cases that talk about that section right there on the page. So you can then move to reading those cases if you want, or move on.
Yeah, and that's all on GitHub, and it's pretty straightforward to follow. So the benefit of having an API layer in front of our database is that we can use special technology to make queries very easy. And that makes programmers like me very happy. So here's an example of a query you might want to do on the OpenLaw NZ API. So let's say we want to ask the API to give us a case, give us information about a case. Let's say 2012 NZHC 1234. What we're saying is we want the name, we want the date, we want the legislation referenced, we want the cases cited by that case, and then for each of those, we want to get their name and citation. So you see how that's all nested into one query? It's like you can define a tree. Now, it's a very natural way of expressing the data that you want, and it's almost plain English. So what happens there is you send that over to our API, and that works out how to get the data from a database, which is it's a non-trivial technological exercise to do that efficiently. And then what happens, importantly, is that it sends that data back to you in exactly the same shape as how you asked for it. So you don't have to do multiple calls, like grab this case and then read it, and then go, all right, well, I'm going to look through each of the cases cited, and then I'm going to look and grab its name and citation and so forth, all in sub-queries or extra queries. You just ask for it in a big nested tree, exactly what you want, and it will return it back to you. There's a technology called GraphQL. We make this API available to anyone who wants to use it for non-commercial purposes. And that means that anyone who wants to integrate legal data into their own research or their own website or application, like we have, are welcome to do it. We think the API will be really useful for people wanting to do legal research because you can express a complex data query really easily, and it's super scalable. You're probably not going to make the system sweat, but you're welcome to try. Andy, are you ready for a demo?
Well, we'll see. So I don't know how many times I've been told to never do live demos on presentations, but let's ignore that advice. And what I'm going to do is I'll show you all an example of doing an API query. So you should be able to see my screen now. That's this is the API interface, or an example of it. And it's a way to explore and test queries before you put them into production. So let's say I'm gonna make a query, and we're gonna keep it really simple. I'm just going to let's say I want to input a case citation and get back data like the case name by inputting the citation. So we'll call the query TeLENZ.
Just to interject here, that's actually how we grab, in that website example there, that's how we grab the case information to display on the page. The URL has the citation in it. Yeah.
So what I'm doing here is I'm telling the API that I want it to look at the case citations where the citation is 2004 NZHC 335. And then let's just test that that's going to work. See if it gives us the ID back, which it should. It does. So that's returning data. And what I want is the case name. There we are. So you can see that for that citation, the case name is Cooper Davies Trustees number 8 Limited and Cooper Trustees number 11 Limited.
Andrew, you should do legislation.
All right.
The legislation that's referenced.
But let's say, as well as the case name, we wanted to know what legislation is mentioned by that case. We can do that, again, pretty simply. We open a legislation to cases query and put in the legislation ID and click play. You can see that case gives you, talks about the Judicature Act 1908 and the Companies Act 1993. You can see that on the right side there. We can also add sections if we want to know what sections are specifically referenced. There you can see it's 149 and 87. So that's how easy it is to get data from the API, and it's similarly easy if you want to integrate that data into a thing that you're building. So I'll just go back to the presentation if you give me 1 second. All right. So.
Cool. The API relies on case law data, as you just saw, and that has come through our high-performance data processing pipeline all the way into our database. Now, the way the pipeline works is that we connect to the data store. It could be any data store, and pull in PDFs as well as some common metadata. So theoretically, if you've got a folder full of case law PDFs, and they can be scanned PDFs. So we've got OCR built in that goes off and talks to Azure Cognitive Services. So that's all integrated into our pipeline. So don't worry about the quality. Don't worry about handwriting. If you've got a folder full of case law PDFs, we can turn that into queryable data, no problem. Well, probably no problems. And And I just want to give a quick shout out to PCO for being so supportive of us and allowing us to use the JDO data. So we read through the PDFs, which is a notoriously difficult format to read. And there's going to be some talks, I believe, about that. But anyway, we persevere. And we run it through a series of data extractors. And that means that it goes through each of the PDFs and it extracts things like the legislation that you just saw, judge names, location, filing number, and then we store all that information in a relational database, which the API then connects to. Now it's easy to add more data extractors. We've already got 10 plus, which is all in our GitHub repository, and we have a team of lawyers and developers working on them at the moment. So if you've got more data you want to extract, it's quite easy to plug that into our pipeline. Now this is a little bit of a technical flex, right? But this diagram is what gets Andy and I very excited. There's a slightly more detailed diagram of the pipeline mentioned before. And Andy and I would both be happy to nerd out with you if you're interested about how this works. In fact, thanks to the New Zealand Law Foundation grant, this pipeline runs 84 times faster than the last pipeline we had. But I reckon we can get it faster.
So in our view, an API is a modern and is now basically an industry standard way of getting data out of services. And we think New Zealand should have one for legal data. The reason is that it unlocks tremendous potential for new innovations and insights because it allows people to build things that use that data. And previously, there was no way to do that. So if you want to try it, please let us know. We'll be very happy to talk to you about it. OpenLaw NZ makes 3 specific commitments to its users. The first one is that our code is all open source, as Wayne said at the very start. It means it can be used and modified and improved by anybody. And the license we've chosen is the GPL3 license. Basically, that means anybody can pick up this code that we've made and use it for any purpose, including commercial purposes. But there's a catch, and the catch is that any use of our code must be licensed under the GPL3 license as well. So that means if you pick up the code and do something with it, whatever you do has to be publicly accessible. The code has to be publicly accessible as well. The second commitment that we make is that the access to the data generated by our code is freely available to anybody who wants it, as long as that's for non-commercial purposes. So if you're wanting to use the API, it has to be non-commercial. The third is that our data is traceable to the code that created it. And I think this is particularly important and I think is pretty cool. What it means is that the data in our database is linked to the code that generated that very data. So anytime you access the OpenLaw API, you can also trace the code, the exact version of the code that created it, even if at a later stage, the code's been updated or improved. These are all permanent commitments and won't change. We do make it clear on our website that automated extraction can't provide a guarantee of accuracy. That's simply the nature of automated extraction with the data that's available today. And I think Tom Barraclough's webinar, which is going to be held shortly, will go into this in more detail. So those are our commitments. And I'm going to move now to talk about the collaboration frameworks, the ways in which we think people could make use of OpenLaw NZ's services. In short, we see 4 potential ways: legal research, computer science, legal education, including in the law school curriculum, and international. So in terms of legal research specifically, we've recently built a proof of concept researcher interface. This is part of a project funded by the New Zealand Law Foundation. And the interface came out of a project that was principally about automated case law analytics. That project's almost complete, not quite, but in the next few weeks probably. And this research centre was built as part of that. Basically what it does is it's a way for academics and research teams to define and extract bespoke data from case law at scale. So during the course of that project about automated case law analytics, it became apparent that some data about cases could be extracted automatically with those data passes that Will was just talking about, but some could not. And an example is something like this. So whether or not a case is decided largely on the basis of an absence of evidence is a little bit of a human judgment type thing. And it's not something we can easily teach a piece of code to grab out of a case like we can for a citation or a judge's name. So that's an example of a thing that is a piece of data about a case that we can't get automatically. So we built a research center, and one part of the research center is what we call the human refinement interface. This is a case law display and data entry system for case law research. It allows a team of researchers to define their own case law data fields. So those things that are like in the previous slide, and have multiple people input answers to questions posed by researchers. It's a little bit like SurveyMonkey, but tailored for case law research. The research team can generate random groups of cases so that if you've got 7,000 cases, you're not just confronted with a list of 7,000 cases. They can be split into randomly organized groups of any particular size. And those groups can be shared between researchers. So one researcher can do group 1, for example, and the next researcher can do group 2. They can share data and share data entry that way.
And one of the cool things about that is by having multiple people go through and submit answers, is that you can eventually export whether or not everyone had the same answer. So you can see any sort of discrepancies between people submitting answers across multiple people. You can have 5 team members all do the same case, and they could have 4 say the same answer and one is different, and it gives you the ability to go, well, this one didn't have consensus, I'm going to investigate a little bit further. And so what we've done as well is we went through a bit of a UX design phase, and we believe we've come up with a user interface that maximizes data processing efficiency. So you'll see there we've got this mini map. What that does is that just highlights key areas of interest that a researcher who's going through, I don't know, hundreds of these can quickly get to that point and make a judgment call on that data facet. And you'll also notice there's this unfortunate tendency with some of these PDFs to have handwriting all over them, but that's okay. We use the Azure Cognitive Services, which is just tremendous, to be able to identify handwriting, and then we can do things like say, oh, this is actually a date, and print that out there. So it's designed so that you can go through lots and lots of cases really quickly. You can even reorder the facets to suit your liking. If you want to go through all the dates in one go, you can do that too. And if you're interested in exploring the Research Centre and the features that it has, then you can drop us a line.
The other part of the Research Centre is a data export page. And that's a section that allows you to choose what cases you want, what data you want. So, and you can select data from the automated extraction services or the human extracted services data. You can also build custom data extractors on the fly that test for the presence or absence of particular words or phrases across the data set that you're looking at. So for example, you might be looking at all ACC cases and want to know what proportion of cases mention something like weekly compensation or vocational independence. And you might want to export that into your favorite tool to make a graph. And you can do that. So the data export functionality lets you save the data that you want either as CSV, and that's a format that you can put into Microsoft Excel, or JSON, which is a more hardcore data processing format if you want to do things with code and stuff. So you can export the data and put it into something like Microsoft Excel and make a graph like this one. So this one shows the proportion of cases that mention vocational independence over time. And in fact, this graph, this is looking at all 7,500 approximately district court ACC decisions. And it took about less than 5 minutes for me to go into the research center, get this data out of it, put it into Excel and make a graph. And in fact, it probably took me longer to work out what a pivot table was than it was to make this graph, because I needed to figure out what a pivot table was, because this graph is a graph of the pivot table. So it's pretty cool, and it's pretty powerful and really fast and easy to use.
I'll just mention just briefly, because there's all this great data entry, and some of you might be thinking, what about machine learning? And I think that term is thrown around a lot, and we take a very conservative approach. We are around accuracy first. We would rather not have the data than present inaccurate data. And what could be the eventual evolution of something like a research center with the data facets? If you imagine you have 100 people go over 1,000 cases, or however you want to chop and change it, what that could eventually mean is that we could be using that data as a training set because it has gone through training. And then you could eventually have a really high degree of confidence that it could go through automatic extraction. But we're not there yet, and we're being careful. We don't want to just say, oh, we do machine learning, but it could be there in the future. We're just taking it one step at a time.
Yeah.
So we've thought of a few potential projects that would bring more data into the platform, and we'd be happy to collaborate on these as our platform is ready to go. Like we can just point it at the data source and bring it in. So district courts, old cases, we have OCR ready to go, tribunals, and you can bring your own data. That's okay, but anything that goes into the OpenLaw NZ platform has to be released to the public. That's sort of like our catch, which is probably fair enough. Computer science is another way of collaborating with us. So our code base is naturally collaborative as it's on GitHub, and it crosses over many different languages and a couple of clouds. So this means we have a variety of ways that computer science students can contribute either as an individual contributor or as part of university projects. So some of these projects could be around text extraction and eventually machine learning if we can get the confidence high enough. We have a standalone package which is all tested and isolated and get plugged into our pipeline. And then there's opportunities to learn about AWS, Azure, DevOps, and a whole bunch of opportunities around the web and application space about how to use our API. And one of the cool things that would be done here is you can have a law student and a computer science student working together. So that comes under the legal education side.
In terms of legal education, we do see real opportunities for collaboration inside the law school curriculum. And we're really excited about the TeLENZ project in particular, and how we might be able to help facilitate the integration of modern technology into the law school curriculum. We're thinking of things like a law student learning how to query a large data set and get interesting information out of it, or participating in a research project in the Human Refinement Centre, or collaborating with some computer science students to build some new software. And the fourth area of potential collaboration is international. The way we've built open law is that it actually can be picked up and deployed elsewhere. Another country could pick it up and use the Open Law NZ platform, but for their own jurisdiction. They just have to change the things like how citations are recognised, a list of legislation local to that jurisdiction, and away they go. If it helps improve access to justice, then we're all for it. Our roadmap, I mean, what we want to establish Open Law NZ as a trustworthy and accurate source of data about case law in New Zealand, and we're only partway through that journey. The journey started with automated data extraction, and then the next step was to add the research centre so that we host human reviewed data for the really difficult pieces of information that we can't get sufficiently accurate by automated means. And the third thing we'd like to do is set up an advisory board to help us with things like matters of public engagement and policy, with the final goal, of course, being widespread adoption of the Open Law NZ platform. So, thank you everybody very much for listening. We're very happy to answer some questions. Shall I hand over back to you, Wayne?
Right, I'll just flick through the chat here. So there's a couple of questions around, is it possible to search for areas of law? And one example was employment law cases, for example.
Yeah, it's a really good question. No, except for ACC law at the moment. Categorization of case law is a really tricky problem. That's something that does need basically some machine learning input. It's something that's on our to-do list, certainly, but what we need, basically to be able to do that, we need to train a computer to understand probably the 300 or so different legal categories, and we can apply some machine learning to solve that problem, but you cannot do that apart from ACC law on the Open Law platform.
So we have a question about why doesn't Judicial Decisions Online use your API?
Well, we haven't asked. They may well like to. It's a good question because we give a lot more. We've taken their data and then we've made it really a lot better, we think. So whether they want to or not, they can perhaps approach us to talk.
More than happy. If you want to use it, go for it.
So are there any websites that you know that are using your API that we might be aware of?
Not as far as I'm aware. We don't closely monitor it, but I'm certainly not. Nobody's got in touch with me and said, "Hey, I built this cool thing with your API."
So, do you allow commercial licenses on an unlicensed basis?
Well, there's no bar on commercial use of the code because the GPL license permits that. It's fine to adopt our code base and apply it commercially. The catch, though, is that what you do, if somebody picks it up and does commercialize it, you can commercialize it, but the code that you build must be also released under the GPL license, which means it must be public code. So there's a lot of reading and information on the, I guess, how GPL, the GPL open source license interfaces with commercialization. It's possible, but it just requires some thought. So yes is the answer, but not a blanket yes. I hate to be a lawyer about it.
So there's a couple of questions around other platforms and the use and what's different about open law and some of these other platforms like NZ Lee, IPT decisions are publicly available. So what would be the advantage of using OpenLaw over some of these other platforms?
Yeah, so basically the key advantage, or it depends on what lens you're looking through to ask the question first. So if you're an end user and you just want to do legal research as a layperson or a lawyer, there's what OpenLaw gives you, assuming that we're not comparing to Lexis and Westlaw, what OpenLaw gives you is structured relational data. So you can navigate between pieces of related information. You have a case, you can see what legislation is mentioned, you can see what cases are talked about and get to those cases, and you can see what cases talk about that case, so the other way around. You can find out information like judge names and locations, and you can search through the API and eventually through the website as well on all of those different fields. So it's rather than a case as one single object, a case gets broken down into component parts, and you can interrogate the data based on any of those component parts. That's the key difference. And in plain English, what it means is you can find cases based on Section 174 of the Companies Act by searching like that as a piece of data. You don't need the text Section 174 of the Companies Act to appear in the text of the case. We have a more nuanced approach to determining what a reference to a legislation looks like. That was a nightmare to code. I'm sure William would love to talk to everybody about that.
Just one thing, I saw Andrew Eccleston's question around using a relational database. The database, the data is sort of intrinsically relational, but the main reason, I suppose, that we went down the relational route at this stage, it's twofold. We actually don't use the relational database in any of the processing of the cases. So what we do is we bring in the PDFs and we use a series of SQS queues and lambdas that all run independently off objects. So they're all just like objects being sent around the place, being read and written to S3. So we can actually show you a complete case file that has all the relations, has all the data, and just a straight up JSON file. Because doing a relational database over a distributed lambda sort of system like that is just going to hammer the database. It's not going to be terribly efficient. Whereas, so what we do is that the database is sort of at the end of it. We just basically dump all the data into the relational database at the end with all the relationships. And we've got processes that run via step functions. So it'll run the first wave of data, and then it will go to the next step, and then it will do all the relationships, and then dump all that into the database as well. The second part of that is that we use a technology called PostgreFile. And what that does is it reflects on our database schema and will generate the GraphQL system. I'm sure you saw in the head PostgreFile in Andy's demo. That's kind of out the box. He's a really amazing developer out the UK. And we use Postgres, and it's just really high performance. They take care of the N+1 problem. We don't have to write our own data resolvers, any of that jazz. So it's really getting the best of both worlds there.
That works principally because the database is relational. Sorry to pick on Andrew. His next question there I saw was, given the PCO moves with legislation.gov.nz, can OpenLaw link to statutes as they were in force at the time of the relevant action that is the subject of the case law? Well, hypothetically, yes. It's subject to us being able to reverse engineer how PCO generates their links. So because the date of a judgment is a piece of data that we hold and we store, and the date of a piece of legislation is also something that we get from PCO basically out of the box. So linking those two up is absolutely something we can do. PCO does not yet, I think, expose an API. So we can't just say to PCO, hey, can you give us the Property Relationships Act as at 15 March 2015? It's a bit more involved than that. But I, from what I know, I think possibly we could, yes.
So one, was more of a statement really, but your API would be an obvious place to use that in the OSLE, NZLE, CanLE, et cetera, space to enhance both.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, any of those sites could be displaying a case to a user, for example, and if they feed the citation to OpenLaw, the OpenLaw NZ API, that we can give them back, as you saw, basically any data about that same case. So if they wanted to have a little sidebar that showed related cases, they can use the OpenLaw NZ API to get that data. They don't need to host it.
We've got a question around, can you tell us a bit more about what you've done in respect to the ACC cases?
Not much, because that's we haven't published that report yet, and I'll defer to Tom Barraclough and Curtis Barnes and Warren Forster on that. I don't want to preempt anything that might come up there, but it's not far away.
Have you thought of ombudsman decisions under OIA?
I haven't. I confess that I don't know much about them. But yeah, if they're in PDF format and they talk about things like other decisions or case law or legislation, we can plug it in. As William said, all we need is a data store really, and we've built OpenLaw NZ to be very scalable. Whether we've got 10 cases in the database or 1 million. I'm not exaggerating when I say there's no difference to us. We just bring it in and it'll all be there.
I'll just quickly mention there's some comments around CanLE, and CanLE is awesome. So they're kind of like an inspiration to us. We can be sort of more like them, then that's great.
Right, I think that's all our questions, unless there's any last ones to come in. I'd just like to thank Andrew and William for their presentation. I'm sure there's been a lot of interest in this, and you'll get a few emails, no doubt, after this. So thank you to Andrew and Will.
Very welcome. Very welcome. It's been very fun. So thanks for having us, Wayne.